Just imagine, a cold dawn, an empty city. Suddenly, a luxury car, a Porsche, screeches to a halt amid the chaos of stalled traffic. At the wheel is Caio, a millionaire still crushed by the pain of losing his young daughter, who died not long ago. But nothing, prepares him, or you, for what he finds when he opens the door. There, lying on the sidewalk, wrapped in a torn blanket, is a baby all alone, filthy and shivering. And right next to him, a scrawled note. Please, don't leave me alone like everyone else did. In that moment, everything freezes. Caio takes a step back, feeling his heart plummet. How is it possible for someone so small to be so invisible to the world? Calling for help is pointless. No one can do anything. And now, does he ignore it and move on? Or do something that could change everything? If you want to know how a simple slip of paper managed to transform lives and reveal a shocking past, don't go anywhere. The big city's dawn has a frozen silence that sticks to your skin. Caio drives alone through empty streets, cradled by the Porsche's leather seat. The car is powerful, but inside it is just a tired man, hard-faced and shoulders slumped. The sidewalk passes slowly outside the window. He tries not to think about anything, but with each red light, his chest grows heavier. It's as if the cold outside moved in long ago, since that night. Since the last time he held his daughter in his arms. The windows fogged up inside, hot breath drifting out with every deep sigh. Outside, a thin mist clings to the headlights, turning every point of light into a sad smudge. Everything feels tinged blue, gray, drained of all color, just like his face reflected in the glass. Two sunken eyes, a clenched jaw, and that line of pain across his forehead that never vanished. Out of nowhere, he turns a corner and hits a ridiculous traffic jam. Cars stacked up, annoyed drivers flashing headlights and honking softly. He's driven here for years and knows this traffic makes no sense at this hour, especially in the dead of night. The dashboard clock blinks, 2:20 a.m. He doesn't even mind stopping, almost as if he's used to waiting. Picks up his phone, scrolls mindlessly. Flipping past old photos, he catches a glimpse of his daughter as a baby, a chubby little arm, a gummy grin. He closes his eyes fast, swallowing a lump in his throat. For a few seconds, the silence inside the Porsche is almost comfortable. But outside, the world seems suspended, as if something is about to happen. He notices the smell of rain on asphalt, earth and gasoline mixing. Horns again, a taxi passenger shouts something muffled, the noise echoing oddly. The cold glass slides under his fingertip as he opens the window just enough, letting in a sharp bit of frozen air that cuts through the car's leather scent. The breeze hits his face, making him blink hard. He stares straight ahead, straining to see what's blocking traffic. The red taillights of the cars in front grow faint in the mist, nearly disappearing. Caio could easily turn around, take another way. But he doesn't. He sits there, waiting, as if he's in no rush at all. Maybe it's because there's nobody waiting for him at home. Maybe because, on some nights, it doesn't matter where he is. Everything hurts the same. While he waits, an elderly woman rushes along the sidewalk, a scarf wrapped around her head and plastic bags dangling from her hands. She nearly stumbles in her hurry to escape the cold, glances into the Porsche, but Caio doesn't notice. His eyes are lost, running through memories of the hospital, whispered words, the last time he felt his daughter's little hand warm his. The radio's off, just the faint hum of the engine. After another 2-3 minutes, nothing changes. The cars ahead don't budge. Caio curses under his breath, more out of habit than anger. He opens and closes his fist on the steering wheel. Feels that weird urge to scream at nothing. His chest tightens, he swallows hard. All of winter feels lodged inside him. Still, something outside catches his eye. A shivering yellow light, maybe from a broken street lamp, glares off something discarded on the sidewalk ahead. He watches, not sure what it is. For some reason, he can't look away from the dark shape slumped by the curb. His mind drifts far, craving a reason, any reason, to get out of that car, out of the suffocating routine of loss. He grabs his jacket from the seat beside him, shrugs it over his shoulders, hesitates. He's never liked feeling afraid, never liked running from things he can't understand. He blinks, breathes deep again. Outside, between the cars, an ambulance tries to maneuver but gets stuck in the same gridlock. The sky is almost black, But now a thin drizzle thickens, each drop tapping the Porsche's roof in a hypnotic rhythm. His mind wanders through bad memories, old pain that never leaves room for anything else. The scent of baby powder, the pink crib blanket, tiny white booties. Memories so vivid they feel like they're riding in the back seat with him. For a split second, he wants to just call someone. Anyone. But he never does. The fear of explaining his emptiness is too great. Up ahead, shadows move on the sidewalk, and Caio sharpens his gaze. The cold outside seems to seep into him. He studies how the streetlight carves through the mist, spotlighting a strange little bundle by the pole. He doesn't know why, but a chill runs up his spine. It's as if something inside, a tiny spark, tells him that right there, on that frozen sidewalk, something is different. Something even sadder than what he feels. And as much as his instincts say to just drive on, that sense of emptiness only grows heavier. He brushes his forehead. His fingers are icy. His heart thuds, out of sync. The wind blows harder, and Caio realizes he has to get out. Out of the car, out of the silence, out of his own skin for a minute. He doesn't know he's heading for something that will upend his life. He just feels, without understanding. He can't ignore the silent pull from the sidewalk. A few meters away, a tiny sound blends with the rain, a soft, almost stifled cry. Caio can't tell if it's real or all in his head. But deep down, he knows something out in this night is enough to crack the coldest heart. Engines rumble outside, muffled by the closed window, but inside all that exists is Caio's pounding heart and ragged breath. He rubs his face before stepping out. The outside cold smacks his skin like a slap as soon as the door opens. He's long been used to climate-controlled luxury, never this kind of night that bites straight into your bones. At first, he just wants to get it over with. Quick steps. Already frustrated with the traffic and the clueless driver ahead, just as lost as he is. But it's not an accident, not a fight, not street repairs. Just a little cluster of people murmuring on the sidelines. And there, under the tired light of a crooked pole, he sees. It's almost hard to believe. On the ground, by the curb, there's a baby. So tiny, face stained with dirt, deep circles under his eyes as though life's already charged a price. The baby's eyes are open, but listless, not sure where to look. No strength to cry like a normal baby. Only a thin, muffled whimper that barely rises above the traffic's awakening noise. The blanket around him looks more like a forgotten rag. Torn, stained, so thin the night's cold sinks right through to the child's skin. His tiny hands clutch the fabric as if searching for warmth, but it's hopeless. You can see him shiver, right down to his fingertips, lips turning purplish. The chill outside is enough for adults to complain. Imagine a child this small. Caio swallows hard. His stomach turns. Instinct, which he never expected to feel again after losing his daughter, brings him to his knees without thinking. He nearly trips in his haste, desperate to understand. No one in the group comes near, just staring from a distance, waiting for someone else to act. Right next to the baby, tucked into the blanket's folds, is a crumpled scrap of paper. Not a nice envelope, not even a clean sheet. Just a wrinkled, torn edge, scribbled with a shaky hand. Maybe a child's, or someone utterly desperate. But Caio can't bring himself to touch it yet. His eyes are fixed on the baby, trying to grasp how this could happen. A sharper honk startles the baby. He squeezes his eyes shut, suppressing his cry as if he already knows no one's coming. He lets out broken sobs, the kind that only come when hunger gnaws or fear overtakes. Caio feels it pierce straight through his wool sweater, straight to his heart. The baby doesn't smell sweet, not like one freshly bathed. There's the scent of the streets, of dust, of rain-soaked things abandoned in corners. But still, Caio feels something warming in his chest, a mix of anger and pity, the urge to blame someone, anyone. Yet beneath it all, he feels a bone-deep fear, the fear of repeating old pain. The wind blows harder in that instant, as if it could snuff out the street lamp. Caio sizes up the baby's eyes, searching for someone, for an explanation. It's a blank stare, but it's asking, why me? No one ever looks a baby abandoned on the street in the eye. It's too much to bear. Behind him, traffic crawls forward again, but Caio barely notices. He crouches lower, reaches out, awkward, afraid of scaring the child. The baby grabs his finger with all the strength he has, and at that tiny touch, something shatters inside Caio. as if the memories of his daughter, the scent of her, all those sleepless nights, come flooding back at once. He searches around, looking for a mother, a father, anyone watching from nearby. Nothing. Just people locked in their cars, eager to escape any sense of responsibility. The silence among bystanders is harder to bear than the cold itself. And the baby gazes back at him, mouth open in a quiet cry, begging, "Please don't go." The note is right there, waiting. Caio's eyes flicker from the baby to the paper, then back, still hesitant to touch it. He can see the writing pressed hard, shaky, more drawing than words. Sweat trickles down his neck, in spite of the cold. On impulse, Caio straightens out the torn blanket around the baby, carefully picking him up. His big, cold hand looks enormous next to the thin child. The baby stops crying for a moment, just to look up at him. And in that look, time halts, leaving only the question, what do I do now? The wind gusts again, making the whole world feel like it's turned its back on them. Caio feels a tear wanting to break free, but he swallows it down. He was always taught to solve problems with money, calls, orders. But there's no check that can fix a baby abandoned on the sidewalk. He thinks of calling the police, social services, anyone at all. But right now, all he can do is hold the baby close, while the world around resumes as if nothing happened. Car lights and the city's ceaseless hum. Only he and this baby are frozen in this dawn, sharing a fear, a cold, and a loneliness deeper than any fortune could fill. As the baby tucks his little face into Caio's chest, searching for warmth in places he doesn't even know exist, the man senses a choice before him, the kind that changes everything, even the air you breathe. His hand trembles, and finally, he picks up the crumpled note, but doesn't open it yet. For a moment, there's no millionaire, just a lost man and a baby with nobody. And in this icy night, it's impossible to say who needs a hug more. Caio remained there, half kneeling on the cold pavement, the wrinkled note pressed between his fingers. He felt the damp, filthy paper against his expensive palm. In the darkness of that ugly stretch of road, the baby beside him turned his head and let out a faint sound, as if begging for silence. Car lights skimmed past, throwing shifting shadows onto the graffiti-scarred wall behind them. The wind threatened to rip the paper away, but Caio held tight, trying not to tear it. The writing was hard to make out at first, crooked, forced, blue ink running dry. Children's handwriting, or that of the truly desperate. When he was finally able to piece the words together, he read them slowly, whispering just for himself, "Please, don't leave me alone like everyone else did." It felt like a punch to the chest. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness, for a moment, he smelled the hospital from another time. The white room, stuffed animals, the silence that never left since that day. His daughter's image, so tiny, fragile, now just a smile in memory. It was all back again. Caio thought he'd wrestled with grief long enough to be strong, even in the worst moments. But that phrase, so short, so childlike, so desperate, unlocked some inner latch he'd kept bolted shut. His hands began to shake, the scribbled note crinkling against the baby's dirty fingers. The sob he'd swallowed all his life nearly broke loose, caught halfway up his throat, a knot of emotion he could barely describe. Heat burned behind his eyes, the air refusing to come in right. He looked at the baby again. There, curled on the sidewalk, blanket in tatters, dirty little foot exposed. It hurt just to see. The baby seemed just as lost as he was, not crying anymore, just scanning side to side, confused, reaching for a hand that wasn't there. It's strange to think. A baby like this knows nothing of a safe world, of the scent of warm arms, of kindness in a hug. All he knows is abandonment. And now, with barely any words, he's begging, on a paper scrap, not to be left like all the others. Caio thought of all the things he'd told himself. You can't save the whole world. You can't carry everyone's pain. But deep down, he knew. Only someone who's lost understands the void. Only someone truly alone feels it sliced that way, cold as a blade. And that wish, so simple and impossible, was exactly the same as his daughter's in her final night, when all she wanted, all she begged, was for him not to leave the hospital. But he couldn't stay, couldn't do anything but promise, silently, that he'd be stronger someday. He just stayed there, crouched, unable to move. The tears didn't fall. It was more of a dry sorrow, the wish to scream, but no sound would come. The wind swept over him, raising goosebumps on his arms. The note nearly slipped away, and he grabbed it tighter, felt its roughness, the marks of other small fingers, maybe of the mother who wrote it, with nowhere else left to turn. In that weird silence, a car went by honking. The sound faded, barely stirring anyone nearby. The world kept going, but inside him, everything split apart. Caio tried to be rational. I should call someone. I need to leave. I'm not cut out for this. But that phrase kept echoing at the back of his mind, swallowing every plan. Please, don't leave me alone. The baby let out a low hiccup, turning toward where Caio knelt. Stared for a moment, as if seeing a possibility, or just because there was no one else to look at. And Caio felt, without a word, that this was the moment to choose. Even without knowing what to do, even without understanding why he, at this moment, was called to hold that paper, that story, that life. His fingers stroked the note again, slowly. He wondered who could have written it. Imagined a desperate mother, searching for a word that could somehow keep her child from being entirely abandoned to the world. Thought of the family who didn't come, of the cold and so many homeless nights, of the terror felt by someone so small. He looked at the baby again, saw the dirty forehead, a smear of snot on the nose, hair matted. But even so, a purity, an urge to live, even in the rawest vulnerability. A silent request for warmth just in his gaze, already past the strength for a full-blown cry. Caio's watch read nearly 3 in the morning. The avenue was slick, stoplights flickering, the outside world oblivious to a whole life hanging by a scrap of paper. In the end, all Caio could do was clutch that letter to his chest. There was no neat answer, no plan, only this deep pain, not wanting to be like the others, not able to stand by and see another lost soul in the world, because truly, no one can stay invisible forever. The note, after all, didn't ask for a fancy home, didn't beg for food, toys, gifts. It only asked, don't leave me alone. And by then, Caio had made his choice, almost without realizing it. The Porsche's engine had almost fallen silent. The only sounds were Caio's heavy breathing and that biting wind swirling between buildings and dawn. He watched the sidewalk, uncertain where to even put his foot next. Each raindrop on the pavement made it glitter, strangely, as if the whole world was weeping right alongside that baby. At first, you could see it in his face. He just wanted to play by the script. Grab his phone, call social services, say the right lines, solve the situation as if it were just another adult's problem. His hands searched instinctively for the phone, nervous, trying to avoid looking at the shredded blanket, filthy skin, matted hair clinging to the small child's forehead. But it was no use. The baby let out a soft little sound. A hiccup, clenched his fist as if grabbing for someone no longer there. Wide, frightened eyes stared up, looking for some reason. And Caio, even trying to armor himself, already felt something twist in his chest, discomfort. He nearly thought, I just make the call, wait for someone, and that's it. This isn't my problem. Isn't the weight I should have to carry. His finger hovered over the numbers, but then the baby began to shiver, a trembling that seemed to run through his whole body. Caio had almost the impulse to turn away, get in the car, force his heart to forget it all. But suddenly, a sharper sound, a choked, stuck cry. That's when the baby lifted his face, eyes red and swollen, the way only someone who's cried a lot can look. 2 fat tears slid down his dirty cheeks, stopping on the soft curves. The whole street stilled, as if even the traffic was holding its breath, waiting to see what Caio would do. He stood frozen, bombarded by 1,000 feelings. It wasn't just the cold. It was an old, nearly forgotten ache, pain mingled with compassion. That image, the baby's eyes had something, a plea so profound you couldn't ignore it. Just one look, and the child was begging not to be abandoned, again. Caio remembered his daughter. That last night, the hospital, the way she looked up at him, in silence, trusting everything. Suddenly, the baby's face began blurring in his mind with his daughter's. And that's when he realized, no matter how hard he tried to control it, this wasn't a normal moment. His hand trembled. He swallowed hard, trying to fight off the memories, but it didn't work. They were all there, the hospital scent, the helplessness of not having been able to save his daughter, and now, someone so small, so defenseless, depending on him. Only him. Caio took a deep breath, trying to muster his frozen businessman composure, but his knees almost buckled. The street was empty, just a few distant horns, no one watching. Just him, the baby, and that letter, already damp from the drizzle. The baby lifted his arm toward him, instinctively reaching for comfort. But no one came. That look latched onto Caio for good. He looked away, back to his phone, but couldn't seem to dial. Somehow, any quick decision felt like betraying that moment. And then the hardest thing happened. Caio realized he was afraid. Not of the baby, or of scandal, or of onlookers, but afraid of feeling again, of loving, of getting involved, of losing once more. But standing there, heart racing, he was already completely involved. The wind picked up. Caio lowered his face, rubbed his eyes hard, almost wanting to disappear along with the pain. But when he opened them again, he saw the baby reaching for him, trembling now, chin shivering with cold and desperation. He whimpered, a thin sound no one else would hear, except the heart of someone who'd lost, you know? He left the phone in the car. His fingers felt numb. He almost stepped back, but couldn't. He stood his ground, caught in an inner battle between logic and emotion, between fear and tenderness. Deep inside, a small voice grew louder, not logical, just whispering. Don't be like the others. Don't go. Don't leave this child alone again. Your status, your money, none of it matters. It was only there, in that silence, that Caio truly understood how a child's gaze can shatter an adult's last defense. No words were needed, just that silent plea. He took another deep breath, almost on the edge of tears, knelt to the baby's level, not caring about the dirt or anything else. Face to face, eye to eye. And in that instant, Caio saw more trust and hope in that tiny being than he'd seen in years, and everything inside him collapsed. He could not walk away. The city kept to its frozen rhythm, the occasional traffic light blinking, distant horns urging everyone forward. But Caio knew he wouldn't leave without doing something. In that moment, there was no need to speak. He just had to be there, a grown-up finally seeing the voiceless plea of a child made invisible. He held out his arms, hesitant but wanting to offer shelter. And even with no clue what came next, Caio felt, in some strange way, that this was only the beginning. Caio's car sits parked, hazard lights blinking, while the rest of the city passes through the icy night. The wheel trembles under his hands, but it's not the car, it's his nerves. Not even the Porsche's plush seats seem to offer any comfort now. Beyond the fogged glass, the street is slick, full of cold reflections. Headlights sweep over the baby's tattered hood. He stays quiet, hardly moving. Caio tries not to look at the child for long. He pretends to scroll through numbers on his phone, but is really just avoiding the boy's gaze. The note, creased and battered, still trembles in his lap. He pulls up the contact for a shelter and calls. The wait feels endless. Half the world is awake tonight, but only the dial tone answers. Finally, a tired voice picks up. Caio states the basics. Found an abandoned baby, needs help, it's urgent. The person sighs and only repeats that they're full, can't take anyone else, truly sorry, good luck, and hangs up. Caio stares at his phone, still holding it in midair, as if he could reel the conversation back. The silence grows heavier. The baby's tiny eyes seem to sense all the tension. He makes a faint sound, a mix of hiccup and dread, and Caio feels something loosen inside. Trying to keep composed, Caio takes a deep breath, dials another shelter, a more distant one. Again, there's wait, bits of background noise, a TV, distant laughter. Caio tells the story again, heart pounding. The woman on the other end doesn't even bother to fake interest. Says they only take children referred by social services, don't know who this baby is, can't take in an infant with no background. Doesn't ask his name, doesn't say where to start. Caio says thank you, even though there's not an ounce of pride in being polite at a time like this. He goes through one contact after another, names you'd never imagine calling, but they show up when you type emergency shelter in a hurry on Google. Every no makes the inside of the car feel colder. The windows fog up, Caio's breathing grows heavier, and it's like the glass itself is about to cry too. Aside from that, it's all silence. The baby's head has fallen to one side, his little fingers gripping one foot, as if he were trying to hide from the whole world in that tiny corner. Caio wonders, did everyone who called before also get nothing but no? How many people gave up on this baby before he did? During one call, he even hears, "Look, sir, we don't have diapers or resources. We just can't take in anyone else." Another time, a man grumbles that it's the middle of the night, city offices only open after 9, there's nothing he can do. The helplessness becomes a physical thing, making his chest cramp. He thinks of his own house, the silence, the rooms left empty since he lost his daughter. The baby is just another note of bitter silence in that score, but this time the sound seems to plead for help. The phone slips over onto the passenger seat. Caio rubs his face, catching the scent of expensive leather, tinged with the stale bite of cold air and a faint sourness drifting up from the baby's tattered blanket. A distant horn jolts him. Outside, the night drips along like rain, slow and unforgiving. The little note is wedged between the seats, plain as day. "Please, don't leave me alone like everyone else did." He wishes he hadn't read it. Wishes he'd never found that child. Never picked up the weight of someone else's abandonment dumped into his arms. But fate had other ideas. And here he is, parked on a freezing street, a hungry baby beside him and a knot tightening in his chest. In the back seat, between a ripped plastic bag and an old pillow, the baby lets out a squeak. He doesn't cry loud, almost as if apologizing for the trouble. He looks at Caio with deep, tired eyes, worn out from waiting for someone to come back. His mouth trembles with cold and fear, and it trembles less than the hands of the businessman holding him. The street empties. Pedestrians have vanished, the apartment windows above just yellow squares, some flickering with TV light, others dark. Caio feels as small as the baby, wanting someone to explain what happens next. But there's no one around to do that. For the first time in ages, Caio feels maybe there isn't a solution for everything. Money doesn't help. Status doesn't help. Even a fancy car isn't enough. The sensible thing, the right thing, would be to just call for help. But nobody wants to know about this story. He rests an elbow on the steering wheel and his forehead in his hand, stuck there, praying he doesn't break down altogether. The baby murmurs again, huddled in the blanket, eyes half open, smelling of cold and abandonment. In that moment, Caio feels as utterly alone as the baby he's just found. The urge to just walk away, to leave everything behind and pretend none of this happened, is irresistible. But every time he thinks of it, his dead daughter's face appears. That absence weighs heavier than the silence in the car. The phone vibrates again, an automated message, some shelter's feedback survey. The kind of irony that makes you mad at technology itself. Caio ignores it, just closes his eyes, and tries to hold the whole world inside, at least until he finds out what to do. That night drags on, endless. Just two human beings trapped in a glass bubble, cut off from the rest of the world by fear, by pain, by cold, and more than anything, by silence that cuts deep. Caio's car stood there, under the cold glow of a street lamp, in the middle of traffic that was already thinning out. Inside, the silence pressed heavier than all the noise outside. He stared at the torn scrap of paper, at words written in innocent, frantic scrawl. "Please, don't leave me alone like everyone else did." On the seat beside him, the baby had given in. That small body wrapped in such a pitiful blanket shook even harder than it had on the sidewalk. His nose ran, eyes red, breath short and slowing, like he had no strength left to cry. Only little hiccuped sobs left, getting caught in his throat. His chest rose and fell painfully slowly, every so often letting out a huge sigh that scared Caio a little. He couldn't look away from the baby. That smudged little face still streaked with dirt, a crust of dried milk clinging like nobody had cleaned him for days. Wispy hair plastered to his forehead. Caio thought of his daughter. He didn't want to, but he did. The car windows fogged over. It was warm inside, but you could still feel the street's chill seeping in, freezing you from the inside out. It felt like winter had seeped into everything. The piece of paper shook in Caio's hand, and he tried to keep his voice steady, talking only to himself in the quiet. "I just have to wait for someone to answer. I'm doing the right thing. He's not mine. I don't know how to take care of a kid. What if he gets sick? What if?" The phone on the dashboard still showed the last call. A shelter refused. All saying the same thing, just in different ways. Not their problem. Not with them. Call another agency. Try later. We're full. But this baby here, so real, frightened and cold. He was nobody's problem? Outside, someone honked. A motorcycle zipped past, almost clipping the mirror. Teenagers laughed from down the sidewalk, not bothering to look back. Far down the street, an ambulance wailed, that distant sound that unsettles more than it comforts. Caio felt like if he stayed put he'd go mad. He set the phone down, rested his head on the steering wheel, tried to breathe deep, but there didn't seem to be room in his chest for his lungs. The car still smelled of clean, expensive leather, so different from the sour, stale smell coming off the baby's blanket. He noticed how opposites could exist side by side. Luxury and misery, comfort and loneliness. The baby stirred. A tiny whimper, just enough to say, "I'm still here." One eye cracked open, half lost, meeting Caio's gaze with the blank incomprehension of someone who understands nothing. Just a glance, but it was enough. The baby didn't know where he was or why, but he knew abandonment, knew what it meant to be left behind. All those words, they were right there, shining in that wet little eye. "Please, don't leave me alone like everyone else did." Caio caught himself trembling. It wasn't the cold. It was a mix of anger and shame, an urge to disappear. He thought about what he'd say to other people. "I was only trying to help," or "I'm not responsible." But it was a lie. He tried to tell himself that, but looking at the baby, he knew it wasn't true. If he left that baby there in the dark, maybe nobody would ever know. Not Caio, and not the baby. But what if he found out? What if tomorrow he saw on the news that a baby's body was found on some freezing sidewalk? The image burned so badly he squeezed his own knee just to feel his nails dig into his flesh. He sat there, torn, for minutes that felt like hours. The traffic faded, night crept on. The baby's face shone with dried tears. Caio caught his own reflection in the rearview mirror, felt smaller than ever. He wasn't brave enough to leave, but he couldn't walk away either. He picked up the note, folded it, slipped it into his suit jacket, looked at the baby again, felt something foreign grow, a fear mixed with something good, something he was embarrassed to feel, the urge to hold. He didn't even know how to pick up a child, but he stretched out his hands awkwardly. The baby didn't protest, just burrowed his dirty face into Caio's chest, let out a long sigh, and was asleep in seconds. "Just for today," Caio whispered, almost apologizing to someone who wasn't there. "Just tonight." He started the car, looked around, bracing for someone to rap on his window, tell him he was out of his mind. But there was no one. Just him and the baby in a cold city, pretending not to notice each other. He drove slowly, watching every intersection, as if terrified of being stopped by the police or by a ghost from his own past. The baby barely moved, quiet, breathing deeply in his arms. Each minute made it harder and harder to imagine giving him up. Going up an almost empty street, Caio felt fear growing. He didn't know a thing about babies. Didn't know if he'd have the guts to call anyone after. Didn't even know if this was right. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could do something different. Something no one had done for him, or for that little one. The city rolled on, indifferent. Time seemed to slow in that car. One man, one baby, one impossible decision. And a whole night ahead to figure out what to do with it all. When Caio goes into the apartment, the silence hits him in the face. Everything smells of cleaner, of expensive products, the opposite of what he's carrying in his arms. The baby is still clinging to his tattered blanket, dirty face stuck with sleep grime, chin tucked into his chest, as if bracing for a scolding. Caio closes the door quietly, because this child seems too fragile for even the first loud noise. He drops the keys on the counter, carelessly. The sound echoes through the big house, and the baby jumps. His eyes, a little swollen from crying, open wider, not out of curiosity, but fear. Caio has never seen a look like that. Every few seconds, the boy glances at him, then quickly down to the floor, like he's sorry for even existing in that place. The apartment had always been too big for one person, but now somehow it seemed colder. The air conditioner always kept things chilled, but today Caio felt cold in his bones. He knows he should warm the baby, but doesn't even know where to start. It's hard to believe something so tiny could make you this scared. In the kitchen, he rummages in cabinets until he finds powdered milk. Not baby formula, just the full cream stuff he never finishes. He draws a deep breath, stares at a spotless sink. That fancy kitchen has never seen a mess, never smelled of cake, nothing. Just silent mornings, coffee poured by a machine. He warms the milk slowly, watching the pot as if it might explode at any second. The baby whimpers quietly, a tired, feeble sound. Guilt crushes Caio's chest, guilt that's been his companion ever since losing his daughter. He tries to pretend it's not there, but it is. When the milk has cooled a bit, he searches for a baby bottle. Can't find one. He looks for a small cup, anything. He grabs the cleanest espresso mug, pours some milk, blows gently, guessing at the temperature. He's never held a baby like this, never fed anyone so totally dependent on him. His hands shake. The baby seems to sense it. Very gently, Caio touches the boy's lips with the mug. The baby's eyes open wide, hesitating, but the smell of milk wins, and he gulps it down, spilling it everywhere, making a mess. Caio wipes his chin with a paper towel, even manages a clumsy half-smile. The baby stares back, surprised, but the sadness never leaves his face. After the milk, the blanket stinks worse. The odor of street, of cardboard beds, gets to Caio's stomach. He looks at his white sofa and realizes how out of place any dirt would be. But he can't put the baby down. He wanders the room, hunting up courage to take away the blanket. Very carefully, he peels the dirty fabric from the small, thin body. He sees the little feet, dirty, with bruises and purple marks. That hurts worse than a punch. The shower water feels like the hardest thing in the world. He heats up the bathroom, fills a small bucket and gathers up soft towels, trying to make it less strange. The baby is afraid of the overhead light and shivers uncontrollably. Caio tries to talk in a low voice, but he doesn't know what to say. Relax, okay? I'm just going to clean you up a little. He hears himself, and it sounds fake. Even he doesn't believe the way his voice comes out, like a child learning how to apologize. The clean water carries away the dirt, exposing more bruises, a rib sticking out, nails chewed to the quick. Caio wants to cry, but just swallows hard. The baby opens his eyes wide, staring at Caio, waiting for something bad. Deep down, he recognizes that look. Someone who's already endured too much and trusts nobody's promises. He finishes, wraps the boy in a soft towel, settles onto the couch, trying to warm the little one against his chest. He strokes the unevenly cut hair, feels the heat of that little head, and thinks of his daughter. His chest tightens. He sits there, staring through the big windows at the city lights outside. In the silence, he hears only the baby's short breaths. The child starts to relax, slowly, like he doesn't quite trust it, but is too exhausted to resist. Caio holds him, feeling how light he is, and for the first time, really studies his face. He sees freckles, downcast eyes, lashes stuck together. There's real pain there, but maybe a spark of hope, too. For a few seconds, Caio closes his eyes. The chill fades, but he doesn't have the nerve to settle the baby in the makeshift crib he built, a nest of folded blankets and pillows. He prefers to stay there, the tiny one in his arms, listening to the vast apartment breathing with them. As if, finally, the house has remembered it's alive again, even if only for one night. Time passes, but the fear doesn't. He wonders how he'll explain this at work, what people will think. He thinks of his daughter again, and the pain is just as sharp as the fear of caring again. But right now, none of it really matters. Only the warm little body, a hand curled weakly around his finger. That's all that matters now. Caio sits, awkward but careful, with a softness he didn't know he had, at least until sleep drags them both under, together, both full of emptiness and hope. Caio barely slept that night. He tumbled around the bed, dragging the pillow along the headboard, wrapped in a silent, persistent anxiety. Even though the house was quiet and the cold wind made the windows rattle now and then, it was like someone was shouting his thoughts out loud inside. Alone in the dark, only he knew how heavy it felt. The digital clock blinked 3:41, not that it mattered. Lying on his side, he could only see the makeshift crib in the corner of the room. He'd laid the baby on a clean blanket, nothing like the rag he'd been wrapped in on the sidewalk a few hours before. Outside, the city was unrecognizable. No cars, just a solitary dog barking for a moment, and then silence. In the quiet, Caio listened to the baby breathe. Light, with little sighs, just the sort that make you afraid some nightmare will break them. Suddenly something barely noticeable happened. The baby reached a hand to his own face, little fingers trying to clutch at nothing, desperate for comfort in the dark. Such a small gesture, but it hit Caio hard. Because there, In that little hand searching for something to hold, he saw his daughter again. Sharp pain in his chest, like being stabbed. The sick memory of years ago, when his own baby did the same, wordlessly pleading not to be put down. Old smells came back, a vision of a wooden crib, the thin whimper when she was cold. That old wound tore open, scratching from the inside as if it had never healed. Caio squeezed his eyes tight, holding back tears. The last thing he wanted was to mix his stories. This child wasn't even his. He was just there because no one else wanted him. The shelters wouldn't take him. No one else cared. He tried to tell himself that, over and over. Be rational. It wouldn't be fair to get attached again, open himself up to being hurt like that all over. But that idea only worked until the baby sighed, whimpered, flailed a tiny arm, searching for warmth. Every moment was a new chapter of memory, an album's worth of moments Caio thought he'd locked away in a drawer forever. At one point, the baby woke a little. Didn't wail, just a faint grumble, mouth gaping in sleep. Caio got out of bed carefully, shuffling his feet over the carpet. He stopped by the crib and just watched. The little one gazed back for an instant, and in those frightened, enormous eyes, Caio saw his daughter again. The way young children look at you, with that mute hope, needing to know that here, in this house so full of luxury but so empty, they'll be safe. The baby stretched out his arms, clumsy, asking to be held without knowing how. Caio froze, not sure what to do. A million thoughts, and for a second, the urge to step back. But his body wouldn't let him. He crouched, lifted the baby into his arms, breathing in that different smell. A little milk, a bit of soap from the earlier bath, still a hint of the street, of abandonment, clinging to his skin. He pressed the baby to his chest, sat on the edge of the bed. There, in the dark room, he felt the little one's cries loosen, a yawn slip out. A sticky face pressed into his shoulder, searching for safety. Caio's heart thumped so hard he thought it might burst out of his mouth. Fear, desperation, tenderness he couldn't admit, it was all there. He forced his mind to remember. He was only helping. Just temporary. Soon a relative would turn up, a shelter would call. It always went like this, didn't it? He couldn't let it happen again. Couldn't lose again. Couldn't love again. Life had already taught him what happens when you love someone so small, so fragile. But even thinking it, Caio couldn't put the baby down. He sat rocking him, feeling his breath steady. He didn't say a word, just breathed deeply again and again, trying to draw an invisible wall between this child and the emptiness that filled the house. The baby's gaze changed. The trembling chin stilled. He looked straight at Caio, eyes still a little frightened, but almost curious now. Those eyes said everything without a sound. A silent plea. Not to be alone, just like the scrawled letter had said, the one that had come taped to his blanket. That phrase haunted Caio. Please, don't leave me alone like everyone else did. That was enough to melt any defenses. And in that icy night, close to 4 a.m, Caio found himself praying, quietly, without even meaning to, that he'd have strength again. Strength not to be a coward, not to become just another adult who lets this child down. Sleep never really came back. He stayed there, wide awake, feeling what it was to have a baby sleep in your arms, while the weight of the whole world pressed down on you. His daughter's memory flooded back, mixing with the baby's scent, the warm trust of that body daring to hope yet again. Deep down, unspoken, something grew within him. Something Caio couldn't name, didn't want to admit, but it was greater than his fear, the need to protect. Even if it hurt, even if it wouldn't last. That's how Caio greeted the morning, exhausted, red-eyed, heart in pieces and unable to let go of that battered child. Like it or not, it felt like he'd been given another chance. Right there, in his arms, while outside the rest of the world remained cold and indifferent. Dawn arrived slowly, gray and bitter, one of those mornings that makes your skin ache for the comfort of bed. But for Caio, sleep was an impossible luxury. He stared at the ceiling for hours, the baby finally sleeping beside him, snoring softly, as if for that brief instant, the weight of the world had been lifted. He needed to get up. There was a mountain of things to take care of: diapers, milk, wipes, a toothbrush, a real blanket, some kind of ID, any clue about the baby's origins. And as strange as it seemed, the house felt less cold than the night before. But whenever he looked at the boy, round face, eyes shut, He felt both warmth and a deep, freezing fear. Caio lifted the baby, careful not to wake him. It still baffled him how something so small could touch every corner of your life. Even the parts you forgot were there. He found a makeshift blanket, and the baby woke with a mumble, rubbed his eyes, made little sounds that weren't quite crying, more like doubting he belonged in that place at all. Caio shrank inside. The first trip to the elevator was a test. In the big mirror, he saw himself, tired face, half-shaved, this baby bundled to the gills in his arms. When the doors opened in the lobby, a neighbor, Donna Flavia, queen of the judgmental eyebrow, froze for a half-second. Her gaze dropped to the baby, then to Caio, and only then came a good morning. That sounded more like a question than a greeting. He replied on autopilot, hands sweating. The silence weighed a ton. They left the building side by side, but she looked back over her shoulder. Caio noticed. Impossible not to. In the car, he adjusted the baby in a makeshift car seat. Not the right or safest way, but all he could manage in a rush. The radio stayed off. He couldn't have processed words right then anyway. Just the two of them, surrounded by faded baby powder and quiet fear. At the supermarket, everything happened in slow motion. In line, two old ladies whispered, their eyes darting between Caio and the baby. A man across the aisle stared openly. Caio tried to ignore it, but felt the stares dissolve each time he turned to look. The baby clamped onto his finger, maybe soaking up the tension nobody dared say aloud. When a little kid pointed and asked loudly, "Mom, why is that man holding a dirty baby?" The mother yanked him away, whispering for quiet, but too late. Embarrassment ran down Caio's face like cold sweat. Inside, he was tangled in knots. He paid fast. In the parking lot, a text buzzed on his phone. It was a friend of his ex-wife's. "Caio, is everything all right? We heard you were seen with a baby. Do you need a lawyer, friend?" 3. For more messages like it followed immediately. He didn't even try to answer. The phone kept buzzing until one came in, short and harsh. "Be careful. This could end badly for you." For a second, Caio nearly dropped everything. Diapers, formula, the urge to help. He felt guilty just for existing there. He imagined 1,000 headlines, neighbors gossiping in WhatsApp groups, some silly rumor turning into bad news on social media. Especially him, a businessman, always a target for people who love a scandal. But then he looked at the baby again, squirming in his car seat, eyes tracing the cars outside. It wasn't fair. This wasn't about him. It was about that boy who'd only lost, only known cold and fear, and now had to lug all this suspicion around, without even knowing why. On the way home, Caio made himself stop by the police station to try and register the boy somehow, just maybe find a family. The officer listened, brow furrowed, asking question after question. "That's not your child, right? You're sure you just found him? Where were the parents? How did you end up with him?" The tone grew sharp. Caio's chest tightened. He tried to explain, showed the note, the filthy blanket, everything. The cop wrote things down, told him to stay calm, said he'd done all he could. On the drive back, Caio almost cried at his own reflection. Saw the baby's eyes in the mirror, so wide, not afraid of Caio, just scared of the world. When they got back to the building, Donna Flavia was there again, this time on the phone. Caio heard his name whispered softly behind his back, as if he were trouble. He wanted to shout, to explain it all, but nothing came out. Upstairs, he took a deep breath. The baby stretched his hands, opening and closing them, searching for an answer he'd never get. Caio sat down in the living room chair, held the little one tight, and let the silence say everything for them both. He thought about the daughter he'd lost, about how the world, sometimes, points a finger before it listens. He tried to muster his courage, because, as hard as it was to handle all this, it would be even worse to turn his back on someone who'd already been forgotten far too many times. He picked up his phone again, ignored the pile of unread messages, and started searching for clues. Any network, anyone who might know about the boy, the mother, any family, however distant. It felt like he was carrying the weight of the whole world on his shoulders, not just other people's fear, but the burden of not making a mistake, of making sure that child didn't feel, yet again, what it was like to be abandoned. On the screen, in between searches and half-hearted attempts, were just their two reflections, together. The baby, clean, drowsy, scared. Caio, with his heart a knot, but his mind made up. And outside, the city kept on, cold, with its lights, its glances, its rush to judge. But inside that room, Caio wanted to believe that there was still a place for compassion. Even without answers, what he could do was hold on to that small hand. Not let go, not even for a second. Caio didn't know what to expect. He'd spent days trying, the baby in his arms, to find any trace of the mother. He'd called the police, spoken to people at shelters, walked from neighborhood to neighborhood asking around, along the parts of the city that dissolved into darkness, ugly, indifferent to the cold. He faced shut doors, hostile replies, even had a cop ask if it was really safe for a man like him to be taking care of a baby, alone. Every question added another brick to the wall that seemed to separate him from the truth. That day, Caio came home exhausted and stood by the window. He watched the headlights below, listened to the distant churn of the city, but it all felt far away, like he was standing inside a bubble, just him and the baby. The little one lay on the couch, curled up under the same tattered blanket pressed to his belly. The baby's face was the kind only a child could have, not even sure what he's feeling, just staring up at the ceiling, his tiny hands reaching for the air. Strands of hair were stuck to his forehead, a few marks of dirt, and Caio felt the weight of his gaze, a kind of innocence that cut through everything, even the pain he tried so hard to hold tight. The phone rang suddenly, breaking the silence. It was a social worker from City Hall, her voice tired. She spoke quietly. "Look, I heard you have a baby, left at the Paulista intersection last week. I made a few calls, looked through the registry. There was only one thing I found that I think you need to know." The woman paused and took a breath. It sounded like she was swallowing a stone. "His mother, we found her body. Just off Rua Caio. Young, no papers, people called her Luana. She was in the database as homeless. She died 3 days ago. Alone. All the noise outside vanished all at once. Gone, every bit of it." Caio felt something hard in his chest, a pressure that started to ache behind his eyes. The social worker was still talking, but he couldn't really hear her anymore. Just the echo, died alone. He pictured the face of a girl he'd never really seen. A pale, thin face, the baby in her arms, her last hope just to be noticed. Caio remembered all the times he'd walked past people like her on the street. So many times, him in a suit, in a hurry, getting into his car, ignoring mothers sitting on the sidewalk with their kids. He'd always protected himself from that discomfort. He'd think, she must have family, someone will help. I can't get involved, I can't fix the world. Now, every one of those choices felt like a monumental mistake, like he himself had been the last one to turn his face away from that mother, from this baby. The social worker said there were no relatives, nobody searching, nobody who knew the family. Just scattered stories, street friends saying the girl was getting weaker, begging for food, sometimes lying on cardboard, talking to herself, singing her son to sleep. Caio held the phone close to his mouth, but didn't have a voice to answer with. He just listened to the baby's breathing, ragged, sleepy. When the call ended, a heavy silence fell in the apartment. Caio went over to the couch. He knelt down slowly, looked at the baby, those little eyelids already closing, and felt a new kind of pain. It wasn't just grief, that endless longing for his own daughter. It was guilt, a sadness born from all the times he'd refused to help just because he didn't want to feel, didn't want to get hurt. The baby turned his head, placed his little hand on Caio's face, trusting, without any doubt. Just a gentle, warm touch. And in that moment, Caio realized, this child really had no one else. Not even a mother anymore. No one to defend him, protect him, or call home. Just Caio, a stranger with pain of his own. He stayed there a while, unable to get up. He studied the baby's open hand, the creases of his tiny wrist, his dirty nose, his heavy eyelids. No one should start life like this, he thought. No one should be left in a corner, wrapped in a torn blanket, with a note begging only not to be abandoned. Night fell colder outside, the wind whistling through the cracks in the window. Caio sat there on the floor, holding the baby. Shame cut through him, along with a small and stubborn longing to do things differently from now on. He pictured the girl, Luana, huddled beneath dirty blankets, fighting with everything she had to save at least her son. He didn't know if he was up to it. He didn't know what would come next, if people would believe him, if there would be a place for the two of them out there. But he was sure about one thing. He wouldn't let that child be alone. And now, more than ever, he wanted to find a way to say sorry to his mother, even if it was only in his thoughts. In the silence they shared, Caio listened to the baby breathe, a small sound in the dead of night. He remained there, holding the child of a stranger, feeling his own heart finally awaken to the suffering of others. When dawn broke, Caio found himself standing at the window, sensing the world outside crawling along, stuck somewhere between cold and silence. The baby slept, finally at peace, cuddled up with a new blanket, still so tiny, cheeks still streaked with dirt that Caio had tried so carefully to wipe away. But the haunted look the boy had worn the night before wouldn't leave Caio's mind. It felt like a plea, trapped, burning in his chest. The apartment, full of pale furniture and high city views, felt oddly empty for its size. Funny how, surrounded by all these expensive things, the only thing that made sense now was the baby's soft sigh, the low sound of his breathing. On the coffee table, the little note trembled. Caio reread it, as if the plea inside it was for him and not just another bystander. "Please, don't leave me alone like everyone else did." That echoed in his mind, growing heavier every time. He grabbed his phone, spent some minutes just staring at the screen. He never used to post anything personal, never let sadness show in a photo. This time, it felt like there was no other way. Someone, anyone, had to see this baby. He started to type, hesitated, reread his words before posting. He took a simple photo, the boy's face hidden, only little hands clutching the blanket, the open note beside him. He wrote with what courage he could sum up. "I came across this plea early this morning. A baby in the cold, alone in the street. His mother, as far as I could find out, is gone, with no help. I can't get these words out of my head. Please, don't leave me alone like everyone else did. I never imagined I'd go through this. If anyone can help or knows the family, please contact me. We need hope. We need to do better." When he hit publish, a wave of nervousness swept over him. He had no idea what to expect. The silence weighed on him, but now it was a shared silence. Notifications started popping up before he could catch his breath. First, a few comments. "My God, how heartbreaking." And "Where is this child? I can help." Gradually, the post with the letter was shared and reshared, multiplying across timelines. Someone made a video with the image, set it to gentle music. A radio producer said they'd get the case on air. Soon, it was on online news sites. People talked about it in the building elevator. Caio's phone wouldn't stop. Messages from people he'd never met. Mothers saying their hearts were breaking, fathers wanting to donate, organizations offering diapers, food, clothes. A social worker, crying as she identified herself, explained there was no shelter space, but promised to personally campaign for at least a warm room for the baby. Caio read everything, holding himself together so he wouldn't break down. He'd hide his face whenever his voice threatened to disappear, turning away as if interested in something else. But inside, it was like an old knot was finally coming undone. For the first time, he felt hope. Then the phone buzzed again. A journalist wanted to hear the story. Caio didn't know if he should, but he sat there on the floor with the baby beside him and spoke in a quiet voice, the best he could manage. He told what he'd discovered about the boy's mother. He spoke of the fear that night, the helplessness of facing the baby not knowing what to do. He admitted his shame, told about the shame, confessed he'd never, ever let himself be personally involved in anything like this before. Afterwards, he just kept reading through the comments, over and over. People from faraway states, even from abroad. A woman posted a video holding a blanket, saying she was donating because she'd once slept in the open herself, as a child. There were stories that all touched on one thing. Everyone, at some point, had felt alone. That's what hurt the most. People asked if they could adopt him. One 12-year-old boy offered his toys, writing, "Give these to the baby, I don't want him to cry." Watching it all grow, Caio understood that this story was never just his, nor just the baby's. That cold morning, in the middle of so much concrete, Caio found himself swept along by something much bigger than him. It wasn't about money, wasn't about power, it was just people wanting to care for someone invisible. At last, he felt he could make a difference. Not because he was helping, but because he had truly been touched. For the first time in a long time, he allowed his own heart to be seen. He went over to the baby, who was waking up now, and placed the little note near him. The boy stared, his face showing the confusion of someone who doesn't yet understand the world but senses in another's gaze some kind of warmth. Caio couldn't help himself. He picked him up, felt his tiny body settle against his chest, and gently rocked him. The baby laughed, a soft, breathy laugh. That alone changed Caio's whole day. Around the house, the clock seemed motionless. Caio kept thinking of his daughter. The last time he held her in his arms. The emptiness that was left when it all ended. He sensed that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't just about filling the silence. It was about giving it meaning. About giving someone else what no one had managed to give his own daughter. The chance to be seen, protected, loved. Still holding the boy, Caio looked out the window at the city coming to life. The luxury cars, the sirens, the distant honking. But there, inside, it was all silence and warmth between two strangers who, somehow, were beginning to save each other. Deep down, he knew. He himself was changing. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to forgive himself. Caio was sitting alone in that huge office armchair, the window open to the city's gray skyline. It wasn't even cold, but he felt a strange chill running through his body. The baby was sleeping in the room next door. Outside, he could hear a car passing slowly and a dog barking somewhere far away. He opened his phone again, not even sure what he was looking for. Maybe a wild hope of turning back time, of finding some clue about the boy's mother. The phone felt heavy in his hand. A new notification popped up. Someone had sent him an old video, one of those news clips that make the rounds when a story becomes part of everyday talk. The message said, "The baby's mother appears in this video." Caio clicked right away. His hand was shaking, but it was a different kind of tremor now, anxious, hopeful. The video was barely a minute, but as soon as it started, his heart raced. It was a rough, hastily filmed video. Right away, he recognized the jammed intersection, the filthy sidewalk, honking cars. All the city noises rushed back, as if he was right there again. Foggy windows, cold hands on the steering wheel. But what took Caio's breath away wasn't the traffic or the noise. It was the girl, standing at the edge of the frame. Her hair was a mess, and she cradled a baby in a rag. It was her. The same girl as in the fuzzy news photos. The same one he'd been trying to find for weeks. Only now she wasn't some distant mystery. She looked right at the camera, and that look was all it took to yank Caio violently back to a cold day, months before. In the video, the mother walks up to the window of a black car. The glass rolls down slowly. You only see her hand, almost begging. She risks a "Please, sir." She says it so softly the mic barely picks it up. The driver stares straight ahead, tense. He hands her a bill, but doesn't look in her face. Keeps it quick, wants to get out of there. And in that instant, Caio stopped breathing. The car was identical to his. The camera, at an angle, catches the driver's face. It's quick, blurred by the headlights, but there's no doubt. It was him. The dark suit, the expensive watch, the same cold expression, the kind of look that just wants the world to go silent and leave him alone. Today's Caio stared at the screen in disbelief. The scene exploded in his mind, looping again and again. He had already met that mother. She reached out to him, even if only for a few seconds, and he'd seen nothing. She didn't just want charity. He shoved some cash her way and drove off. The world seemed to shrink. His heart burned in his chest. Caio felt his legs give way beneath him. The baby, that baby, had been left alone because he hadn't truly stopped. Because he'd thought problems like that were someone else's. Because he believed handing over money was enough. Caio didn't even notice the tears falling. Only realized when his shirt was soaked. The video ended, but everything kept churning inside his head, hammering away. That moment peeled him to the bone, leaving only raw pain exposed. In that crude cell phone video, he saw all the weight of a past he would have rather not remembered. All he could feel was shame, scalding, suffocating guilt. He thought about how he'd spent months trying to find meaning, trying to fix things the right way, proud of what he had to offer now. But you can't undo what's already been done. He finally understood what the baby's note meant. Please, don't leave me alone. It wasn't just a plea. It was the cry of someone whom, deep down, he himself had helped to leave behind. Suddenly, the image of the mother, frail, with that exhausted look, flooded his mind. He kept thinking how it must have felt for her, holding her child, begging strangers for help, not knowing whether she'd have an awning to crawl beneath that night. or if her son would make it through on the cold pavement. How many drivers had seen her like that? How many, like him, had just looked away? Caio closed his eyes, trying to block it all out, but he couldn't. There's no going back. You can't undo that choice. For a moment, he could only stare at his own reflection in the dark window, seeing a man who had all the money in the world, but failed when it mattered most. His lips moved slightly, but no words came out. He curled up in the chair. Suddenly, that giant apartment felt tiny and smothered in a heavy silence. From the other room, the baby made a soft sound, a drowsy, sleepy whimper, just enough to make Caio open his swollen eyes. He got up slowly, like his muscles weighed twice as much, and went to the bedroom. It was strange now, looking at that little face, knowing all that had happened. The baby slept peacefully, his cheek pressed to his arm. He was clean, in the blue onesie Caio had bought, hugging a little cloth as if it were his whole world. Caio sat on the edge of the crib, hand trembling, just watching. Tried to whisper something, but all that came out was silent sobbing, those dry heave sobs that hurt to hear. He stroked the baby's head, so gently. Stayed there, completely undone. It was in that silence, between his muffled crying and the child's soft breathing, that Caio finally understood what needed to be done. It wasn't just about comfort, a good home, or medicine. It was about never again being the person who looks away, who shields himself from someone else's pain. With a crushed heart, Caio whispered a promise. He wouldn't let another chance slip by. He wouldn't ignore even one more cry for help. He looked at the baby, who opened a curious eye, and for the first time felt the faint thread of courage stir in his chest. There, in that dark room, at the lowest hour, Caio decided, from the depths of his heart, that no child crossing his path would ever be invisible again. The day dawned gray, one of those mornings when even the sun seems to scrape along the ground in embarrassment. Caio looked out the bedroom window, gripping tightly the letter he'd left by his bed after a restless night. The silence weighed heavier than any expensive suit. The little one was curled up asleep on the couch, hugging an old stuffed toy a kind neighbor had dropped off a few days before. The hush of his breathing was the only certainty in the whole apartment. In the bathroom mirror, Caio faced himself, dark circles, worried lines etched across his face. Hard to believe that just weeks ago he would wake up thinking about business, meetings, investments. Now, all he could think about was this child, the big, deep eyes, the way he'd clutch Caio's collar with no strength, almost begging not to be forgotten. The guilt wouldn't leave Caio alone. He replayed the old video again and again in his head, the baby's mother, so young and tired, stepping up to his car at the lights, hope etched on her face, her trembling hand pressed to his window, the plea muffled by the sealed glass of his Porsche. And himself, frozen, empty eyes pretending it wasn't about him. It was as if a part of her face had become fused to his own skin, impossible to shake free. Today was the day. Caio drew a deep breath, straightened his tie for the 10th time, and went to wake the boy. The baby, now pinker after days of baths, hot food, and clean blankets, opened his eyes slowly at Caio's touch. He didn't cry, just raised his arms, a quiet, trusting gesture. It threw Caio completely. He swallowed hard, tried to be strong for him, for the mother who would never come back, for the daughter who'd never had the chance to grow up. On the drive to the courthouse, the city's traffic seemed to sigh. People in a hurry, honking left behind, fogged up windows. Caio checked the rearview mirror often, just to make sure the baby was still there, asleep again, a serene little face. The adoption documents were on the passenger seat, the pen trembling with nerves. As much as he tried to appear confident, his hands gave everything away, fear of failing, fear of not deserving this. At the courthouse entrance, the building's harshness was nothing compared to the mess inside him. Distant voices, footsteps echoing, the smell of cold coffee and cheap perfume. He walked straight, but anyone could have seen how heavy his stomach felt. No one there knew the storm of regret Caio was carrying. Only he did. In the waiting room, he sat with the baby in his arms. The boy wiggled restlessly, rosy-cheeked, a bit of hair falling onto his forehead. A staff member passed, arms full of paperwork. She shot them a curious look, but smiled before moving on. Caio could feel the child's warmth radiating through his jacket, a presence so alive and soft it almost hurt. When his name was finally called, his heart nearly jumped into his throat. The judge was a woman with tired eyes, but a gentle face. She read the paperwork out loud, leafing through the pages slowly. She asked about his decision, maybe just to make sure this was for real. Caio took a breath and told her about the cold night, the hastily written note, each word dragged out of him like it hurt. His hand shook more than usual as he said, for the first time aloud, that he wanted to be the boy's father. Not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because he couldn't bear the thought of another day seeing an invisible child, no arms to hold him, no name, shivering and hungry. The room went so quiet you could hear the old clock ticking on the wall. Caio could feel every gaze on him, eyes full of doubt, scrutiny, but also maybe hope. He took a breath, shifted a bit, and even though his throat was tight, managed to finish. I also want to create an institute. A place. A shelter for abandoned babies. Not just this one, but all those I can reach. Because I was indifferent. Because I failed. Because this letter can't just be another piece of paper on the ground. Because where I failed before, I'm never going to fail again. He looked back at the baby in his arms. The boy, cheeks now a little damp from a runny nose, glanced at the world as if he still didn't understand that someone might really be his. And Caio felt, for the first time in a long while, seen. The judge wrote something down, not hiding her emotion. An assistant came in, brought documents, asked for signatures. Every time he signed, Caio felt another shock of memory, a whole film playing, his lost daughter's face, the young mother on the street, the silent cry of so many forgotten children. His eyes filled, but he refused to look away. When it was done, Caio sat with the baby in his lap, the letter folded in his pocket. Outside, a fine rain began to tap against the window. He knew there was no going back, but for the first time, the thought was calming, not frightening. The boy, maybe sensing the weight of the moment without understanding the words, smiled at him. A tiny, toothless, innocent smile, one with no past attached. And in that moment, the big man, the businessman, the Caio carved by pain, was the one who had to fight not to cry in front of everyone. The minutes ticked by slowly, as if time wanted to give him a chance to say goodbye to the man he'd been. Each second was an invitation to begin again. And in that once cold room, between papers and promises, something new was born, not just for Caio, but for every child still waiting for someone to stop, to look, and not shut their eyes. No one blinked. You could feel the heavy hush in the courtroom, even with so many people there. Some tried and failed to hide their tears, wiping them away with the back of their hand, taking deep breaths like the air had been trapped inside them for hours. Caio stood there in his dark suit, his gaze unsteady, hands a little shaky, his shoulders sagging under years of longing and fear. In front of him, the judge flipped through some papers, her pen tapping softly on the desk, a nervous tick, as if she too felt the weight of this moment. From behind, you could hear people holding their breath, someone sniffling quietly. No one glanced at a phone. No one spoke a word. The whole world seemed to have paused, just to watch what would happen next. Across the room, there was the little boy, bathed, dressed in fresh clothes, looking nothing like the first time Caio saw him, filthy and shivering under that frayed blanket. Now, the boy looked around curiously, brow furrowed as if trying to figure out what comes next, but with the light-hearted innocence of someone who has no idea of everything that hangs in the balance. Every so often, he'd look back at Caio, flashing a shy smile, the kind that only appears when a child feels hope and fear, all at once. Caio pressed his lips together and breathed deep. Inside his head, thoughts battered around like rain against the window in the middle of the night. Is this going to work? Is everything going to be okay? What if? But he did his best to push the fear aside, looking at the baby. This wasn't the time to give in, not this time. The judge cleared her throat. Suddenly, everything seemed to slow down. Mr. Caio, after careful analysis, she began, her voice calm but hoarse with emotion. And while she spoke, her words seemed to get lost for a moment in the cold air of that enormous room. No one even dared breathe loudly. When she finally said, "The adoption request has been approved. As of today, you are, legally, father and son," it was as if a weight had been lifted from everyone's chest. Some people quietly clapped, others muffled their sobs with their hands, and even the judge herself managed a smile of relief. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could describe what happened next. The baby stood still for a few seconds, quietly looking around as if trying to process what had just happened. Then, as if the whole world had faded away, he broke into a huge, bright smile, a pure, toothless grin, the kind that only someone who hasn't learned how to pretend can give. His eyes sparkled in a funny way, as if a little light had switched on inside him. Caio, on the other side of the room, stood frozen. His chest ached with so much feelings he barely knew how to name. And then, without anyone needing to say a word, the boy started running, his steps a bit wobbly, stumbling over his own short legs, but determined. A small clatter of little shoes echoed in the room. Everyone was watching, but it felt as if the two of them were alone in the universe. The baby threw himself into Caio's arms with the urgent sincerity of someone who just wants to feel another's warmth, with the certainty that, for the first time, he was safe. Caio knelt slowly, opened his arms without fear, his heart wide open, and scooped him up. They hugged so tightly, anyone could feel it, even from across the room. Caio closed his eyes when he felt the little arms squeeze around his neck. A wave of warmth coursed through him. Memories of other days, the daughter he lost, cold nights spent alone, flashed through his mind. But now, everything felt different. It was like something inside him had let go. A lump rose in his throat, impossible to hold back. The tears came, silent, heavy, honest, sliding down a face already marked by years. The child laid his head against Caio's chest, letting out a tired, peaceful sigh, half relief, half surrender. Caio's heart was racing. He couldn't see it, but the boy could sense the scent, the warmth, the unique way only a father holds and protects a child. Tiny hands gripped Caio's shirt, as if they never wanted to let go. It was a real hug, a hug that heals the wounds no one sees, let alone explains. If anyone had looked in from the outside, maybe they would have noticed the details. The baby kicking his little legs, Caio's gentle hand rubbing that tiny back as if silently promising that no one could ever take him away. The judge smiled, lowering her eyes so she wouldn't cry. One of the court assistants dabbed his face with a handkerchief. In that moment, no one was rich or poor, no one was a stranger. There was a father, a son, and a brand new beginning. The people in that room, touched to the core, knew they were witnessing something rare. It wasn't just about adoption, paperwork, or law. It was about second chances, about new starts, about healing hearts. The baby let out a tiny giggle. Caio pressed his forehead to the child's head and closed his eyes again, letting it all pour out in silence. There was no need to hide the pain anymore. Holding the boy in his arms, he understood. To care for someone like this, to love without any guarantees, was to give himself a second chance too. For a few moments, all that existed was that embrace. And in both their chests, a new feeling. Neither of them would ever be truly alone again. It was already night when Caio got home, the baby sleeping in his arms. He came in quietly, with the careful gentleness of someone still not quite believing this was real, as if he might break the moment with a single wrong move. The apartment seemed bigger than ever before. The silence was so complete he could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. But that night, Caio wasn't in any hurry. He stopped near the dining table. On top of it still lay the little letter he'd found on the sidewalk, its corners bent, chocolate stains and specks of dirt across the paper. Funny, just looking at it made his throat tighten. With both hands, he picked up the letter and read it again slowly, unhurried, as if time had frozen. Please, don't leave me alone like everyone else did. For a while, Caio just stood there, looking at that scrap of paper as if it could rewrite everything. He thought of every moment since that freezing dawn in the car, the baby wrapped in the old blanket, that frightened gaze in the darkness, the fear of letting himself care. He remembered how much he'd resisted, how hard he'd run, and how that one simple plea had brought down every wall he'd ever built around himself. The baby mumbled softly in his arms, as if he sensed what was happening. Caio looked at the boy with a tenderness he'd never felt before, noticing a thread of drool at the corner of his mouth, tiny eyelashes still damp from crying. Just a baby, that's all. Could have been any baby, but to Caio, right now, he was his son. Suddenly, it felt as if the whole apartment, his whole life, had been waiting for this very moment. Caio put the letter aside, went to the other room, and took out a nice picture frame, one of those brand new ones, and he bought without ever knowing what to put inside. He cleaned the glass, wiping it with his shirt sleeve, a bit clumsy, and took a deep breath. He placed the letter inside the frame, straightening it, looking again at the shaky handwriting, the uneven, childlike words. Then he went to the window before hanging the frame on the wall, where everyone could see it. Rain pounded heavily outside, but now it no longer carried that old feeling of emptiness. It was just rain, not the silence of pain. The air was cold, but Caio felt a different warmth, a good, heavy feeling in his chest. He sat on the sofa, the baby still cradled in his arms, took a deep breath, and followed an old, familiar train of thought, that fear of loving again, of losing everything once more, of never being enough. He glanced at the letter on the wall. Read it out loud, his voice trembling at the end, barely more than a whisper. Please, don't leave me alone like everyone else did. The words came out slowly, tearing through him. And Caio felt the tears streaming again, unashamed, as he hadn't cried since the death of his daughter. He cried like a child, slumped on the couch, the sleeping baby heavy in his arms. He cried for all he'd lost, for every time he closed his eyes, for all the invisible people he'd passed by without seeing. The baby woke, one sleepy eye half open, quietly watching his face. Of course, he didn't say a word, but he reached out and grabbed Caio's finger, with that tiny grip only a baby has. In that instant, there were no more luxuries, no coldness, no Caio the businessman. Just a man and a child, two lost souls trying to find each other in the world. There was the sound of rain, the smell of food warming in the kitchen, soft light in the corner of the room. The apartment wasn't cold anymore. Caio gently rocked the baby, whispering softly, I promise, truly. I'll never turn my eyes away from you again. I swear. Never again. His voice faltered, almost too weak to speak. He spent a long time just looking at the framed letter, thinking about all the promises he'd made to himself and had broken. But this one was different. It wasn't for him. It was for this baby. And, in some way, it was for all the others he'd never wanted to see. He thought of his daughter who was gone, of the baby's mother, of the countless invisible children waiting for someone. The boy, now wide awake, smiled shyly as if he understood the promise. A new tooth showing, chubby cheeks flushed. Only innocence. Caio kissed his tiny forehead and felt peace, a simple peace, filling everything without asking permission. Time truly stopped. Just the two of them, the letter on the wall, the future left wide open. Caio stayed there a long while, his hand wrapped around the small one, listening to the sound of his breathing. The tears had dried, but the feeling lingered. It was a mix of joy, fear, hope, that sense of starting over, without a manual, having no idea how to do it. And maybe that's just how it is. Just promise with your whole heart. Just love as if there's no risk of getting hurt. Just see what you once tried so hard not to see. In that moment, looking at the letter on the wall, Caio understood that his own cycle of pain had become a brand new path. It wasn't a beginning anymore. It was destiny. It was home. It was the start of everything else.